Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 15th of March 2023. This is the military aid and equipment section. Just a few things that have just turned up from this morning's news. Odessa has been struck, double tap strike, where they hit with, in this case, an Iskander ballistic missile, wait a few minutes for the emergency services to come and pick people up and save people, and then hit the same place again. So that's a claim that's going out at the moment from a lot of sources. There are paramedic and a first responder, maybe an ambulance person, I think, have been killed. Emergency service worker and a paramedic, yeah. So that's being variously reported. There's quite a bit of video footage, not very nice looking stuff going on in Odessa. And then another bit of footage has come out from Tula of a drone that's circling and then does a dive bomb and hits a chimney in Tula. And that's interesting because they're trying to take it down with small arms fire and they fail. And then bosh, it does its damage there. That's good news for the Ukrainians that they're continuing to damage the energy infrastructure of Russia. Right. Okay, going on to military aid now. So German Rheinmetall wants to build at least 4 arms factories in Ukraine, according to Le Monde. Rheinmetall plans to create the factories for the production of projectiles, military equipment, gunpowder and air defence. According to SZ, Rheinmetall CEO Papaga announced today that they plan to increase their production of artillery ammunition to 1.1 million shells per year by 2027. This will be possible due to the new plants already being built in Toulouse and the ones planned in Ukraine and Lithuania. Furthermore, Papaga announced that Germany is likely to award Rheinmetall a new framework contract for the production and delivery of up to 2.2 million shells of artillery ammunition on a 10-year term. This new framework contract was most likely already announced by Minister of Defence Pistorius on the 25th of January 2024 and will also include deliveries to Ukraine. So really good news, Germany stepping up there. Now, they have also yesterday handed over demining equipment to the Explosive Ordnance Department of the Ukrainian government and the expert service of the State Scientific and Technical Expert Center of Ukraine. So really good news there. Lots of demining equipment that will hopefully do a good job. Then yesterday, the Bundestag once again did not support the supply of Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine, according to the Spiegel, or according to everyone. It's, I think, again, a political thing rather than actually on the subject matter of Taurus. It's more about who proposes these things. Majority of German MPs voted against the draft resolution of the opposition bloc, CDU-CSU, which supports the transfer. The day before, German Chancellor Scholz once again spoke against it. Now, this is also worth taking into account. Fabian Hoffmann says, to no one's surprise, it took around 24 hours for the secret information that was referenced in the parliamentary debate on Taurus to leak. The information pertains to the processing power required for inputting and processing targeting data. Here are some thoughts. So I think what happened is during the debate in the Bundestag, they had a behind closed door session with some experts who gave them some, I presume, reasons why Taurus shouldn't be given to Ukraine. And the experts were talking about processing power, but this has ended up being leaked. Anyway, this is what was talked about. The notion that Taurus targeting process necessitates large amounts of processing power and data is not a new or a secret revelation. Broadly speaking, there is a simple and an extended Taurus mission planning protocol. The two are also referenced in the leaked call from previously, remember. The simple mission planning typically involves waypoint navigation using GPS. While this simplifies the planning process, it also renders the Taurus more vulnerable to countermeasures and reduces accuracy. So if you're just doing GPS waypoints, there's a significant probability that the missile won't hit its target. The extended mission planning is more complex. Here you integrate topographical data for TERCOM, pictures for image-based navigation, data on enemy air defense positions, and more detailed models of your target. The probability of Taurus reaching and eliminating its target rises with the complexity of the mission planning process. As discussed in the leaked call, the greater the intricacy of the targeting process, the higher the level of training required by the Ukrainians. Keep in mind that this kind of extended mission planning was feasible back in the early 2000s, though. So it doesn't require supercomputer level technology. It's also entirely achievable to store the necessary data separately from the physical data processing machines. In other words, you can store some of that data back in Germany, Britain, France, wherever you're procuring these missiles from. In an elite call, officers discussed how Storm Shadow, so the UK cruise missile mission planning, is conducted through reachback. This likely refers to accessing some data stored in the UK. This indicates that the UK helps Ukraine perform an extended mission planning process in Ukraine. So does this change anything? By point, what it means is, does the idea that actually if you want the extended planning process to take place for these extended missions, or the missions using like the extended process, then is that too difficult for the Ukrainians to manage? Do they need training that they can't get? Do they need access to infrastructure such as data processing infrastructure that they don't have? And will Germany have to become more involved? And is that a problem for giving tourists to the Ukrainians? Does this change anything? Absolutely not. Hoffman says Ukraine is fully capable of developing its own data processing infrastructure and obtaining its own targeting own data, which they probably already have. Let's not forget that Ukraine also has its own cruise missile program. The fact remains that if there was political willingness to allow Ukraine to use Taurus, the government would find a solution that minimises and potentially prevents any direct Bundeswehr involvement in Ukraine. The key issue is a lack of political will. In other words, where there's will, there's way. This has been a savvy political move by the SPD. So the SPD are the ruling government, or at least the main coalition partners, and they invited high-ranking officers to a scapegoat secret meeting where reporting was not allowed, talking about the scarcity of German equipment. It's no surprise that this tactic influenced some uninformed members of parliament. So this could have been a way of also getting some of those people in the Bundestag to vote in ways that supports Scholz's agenda. Okay, right, moving from Germany to mainly to artillery ammunition, but we're going to be talking a bit about France in amongst that. So the Portuguese government have just announced that it signed on to the Czech-led shell procurement mission for Ukraine, adding another 100 million euros, $108 million to the effort that already has fully funded the acquisition of over 800,000 shells. Well, actually, according to some reports, the Norwegian donation took that up to 1 million shells, and this will take it further possibly as well. So anyway, Portuguese turning up to the party there as well. That's really significant for Portugal. It's a much smaller country in terms of GDP and population than, say, UK, US, etc., etc. Okay, Sweden joins the Czech initiative and allocates 30 million euros for ammunition for Ukraine. This was reported on Facebook, as you should do, by the Swedish embassy in the Czech Republic. So that's fantastic. It looks like artillery ammunition is going to be sorted out in the near term. Now, Le Monde here talking about talking about an awful lot concerning Macron and what's been going on. There's just this. I'll see if I can get it in English. Let's translate that. So the idea of Macron deciding on potentially giving troops across to Ukraine, or at least not ruling them out. In any case, in the coming year, I'm going to have to send guys to Odessa, said Macron, with a clear air in front of a handful of guests. So this was going back a little bit of time, but he has said that much, which is, I think, pretty fascinating. I don't know why Odessa seems to be this key place, but nonetheless. Le Monde, France has been examining the idea of sending troops to Ukraine since June 2023. So this isn't like something that's just come out of nowhere recently, although there is this idea that they have been briefed a lot more accurately, a lot better, the French, more recently. There's also something to be said about... So the question is, why has Macron suddenly turned up here to the races? Why is he looking like he is the leader, the rallying member of the European heads of state? What's changed? So I think there's been some briefing that's been different. There's speculation here from me. I think France has been briefed accurately and realistically and have a good handle of what's going on and are under no illusions as to how serious this is. But I also think the coups in in Africa are playing a part. So the Sahel region has seen 7 coups in the last few years or whatever, and most of those nations would have previously been part of the colonial history of France, or are part of the history, and will have had those French colonial connections where the French Foreign Legion and other forces would have been involved in those nations, in security in those nations, and in the extraction of raw materials on behalf of France from those nations. Now, they've been replaced by a kind of near-colonial Russian setup, including Wagner. But I think the idea would have been that the Russians went to these nations with an interest in having their hands in the pockets of these raw material merchants, getting their hands on diamonds and oil and whatever else it is, right? So I think Russia have gone to some of these nations, I'm simplifying here greatly, and said, look, French are just extractive and colonial, you don't want them, throw off the shackles of French colonization and we'll help you, we'll kind of provide you security as the French were, and maybe we've got slightly better deal than the French gave you. But essentially they're just replacing the French there, but they've obviously sweetened the deal enough for those nations to take on board what the Russians are offering and throw their nations into coup territory and get rid of the French. So Macron's present positioning might well have a lot to do with that, about the Russian influence in otherwise French kind of colonial territories. I just think that's probably an important component there. Right. France and Germany will set up production lines in Ukraine for shells and missiles. So we've heard for Papenga, there's going to be 4 factories in Ukraine. Well, France is getting in on that. They are the second biggest arms exporters in the world. I don't know how big their artillery shell manufacturer is, because actually they don't produce a massive amount of artillery ammunition. There's a big talk here that came from Sébastien Lecornu, their defense minister, and we're going to just dip into this for now. But what I think the French do is kind of what most Western nations are heading towards, which is we're not going for a massive artillery shells, we're going for much better use of artillery shells. They may be more expensive to make, but they're far more accurate, and so we need to use far fewer of them. So anyway, quote, perhaps a more specific point on ammunition, since many of you have returned to it, even in the 155mm category, so NATO ammunition size there, not everything is equal. Nexter's shell, so a French shell manufacturer, may take a little longer and be a little more expensive, but they also go a little further, where other grenades cost half as much but go half as far. I presume these shells there, and that's the difficulty, that the reliability of this equipment isn't quite the same. It's also our strength, the French, with our defence industry, to be able to find the right balance between production times and not compromising the quality of the material produced. Obviously, it's in an environment in France, but also in the European Union, where the standards, for example, for pyrotechnic protection aren't quite the same as in Ukraine. In other words, we can't build as many because our health and safety regulations are better in the EU, but also we are making a better standard quality of product that goes further and it's more accurate, and etc., etc. And yeah, there you go. So, and we also come back to our thoughts on local production in Ukraine. Perhaps to try to save times, we could obviously compress. So in 2023, France produced, and this is according to French aid to Ukraine, very good source, rather like German aid to Ukraine, produced 30,000 full-shot 155mm shells. So that's not going to be all of the artillery shell production that they have, and mortar bomb production, but nonetheless 30,000 full shot 155mm artillery shells. The production will increase to 48,000 in 2024 and 60,000 in 2025, not including production in Italy and Belgium. So this is a very small amount that they are producing, but they argue, it is, there's other things to consider. So another piece here. So in 2023, Urenco invested 60 million euros in the artillery shells powder production plant, recently announced by Lecornu, as recently announced by him. Its construction will start soon. It should be completed in the first half of 2025. The aim is to produce 150,000 155mm shells a year. So, I'm not quite sure. There are different numbers being thrown around here. And then there's also this to add in. So the use of AI to reduce the consumption of 155mm munitions is discussed by Le Cornu. The task of improving the seizer's accuracy was entrusted to Helsing AI, a German startup specializing in military artificial intelligence. Quote, "We have shell problems in Ukraine. The best remedy is to use fewer. If you need 10 rounds to mark your target, or if you can do it with the first shot, that's a game changer." So, yeah, the Russians might be firing 10 to 1, but if the Ukrainians can hit with one shell where the Russians would take 10, then that actually kind of equalizes things to some degree. So, there you go. There's lots to consider. A point often missed, says someone. And French aid to Ukraine says, an article in Le Figaro reported on the problem of getting closer to Russian lines to fire shells. "We were given ammunition limited to a range of 7 kilometers and in too small a quantity. With these shells, we are forced to come within 3 kilometers of the Russians to hit them. And at this distance, they will attack us with kamikaze drones before we have sent the first shell. Tell them at home to send us 10 to 12 kilometer ammunition and F-16s to give us air cover." Well, actually, the French ammunition would be firing with a range considerably greater than that. So the French are saying, well, there are advantages to, fewer shells, but better shells. As someone criticizes 30,000 shells for a full year after a year of war in Ukraine, yikes. And French aid says, "I know this is not enough, but did you read the whole post?" In other words, there is a lot more to add to it, but there's still the argument that that's not enough from the French there. But as he says, and someone else was saying this yesterday in one of the threads, like, thank you for recognizing this. It's something I've actually said for a long time, but it just takes a long time to set this stuff up. Yeah, you can talk about getting onto war footing, but you can't just magic up an entire factory's worth of capital and machinery for this very high-tech precision. Like, artillery shell manufacture is a difficult process involving quite a lot of raw materials, but it has to be perfectly done. Otherwise, you get the situation with the North Korean projectiles that are causing explosions in tubes and deeply inaccurate. So this is quite high-tech manufacturing to some degree, and it takes an awful lot to ramp up production. It's not something that can be done super quickly. So Europe has reacted, as has the US, in ramping up production, but don't expect it to be like magically you can move from 30,000 shells a year to like 1 million shells a year just by, ordering some new machines off Amazon. Okay, so French aid to Ukraine also talks about what's going on a daily basis to Ukraine, and just like German aid does, shows it being used as well. So there's a big long thread on that. But just interesting that a load of humanitarian aid, medical aid supplies from France was on the way yesterday as well. Right. So going back to artillery ammunition, though, Ukraine receives South Korean 155mm ammo. So McAllister Army ammunition plant in Oklahoma. I wonder who in Oklahoma is advocating for the Ukraine aid bill to go through. I wonder what Republicans there. Oklahoma. Has been refurbishing South Korean 155mm shells with new markings and fuses, which are then sent to Ukraine. It was previously alleged in leaked documents that beyond South Korea backfilling US 155mm stocks, South Korean 155mm shells had actually been delivered to Ukraine. Associated Press now publicly reports on these activities at McAllister, although the source of this information is unclear. It comes as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Brown, is set to visit McAllister today with members of Congress. So that is really good news. I mean, I've been saying for a long time that South Korea really needs to be stepping up in terms of like helping Ukraine either directly or much more backfilling, because North Korea is very obviously helping Russia. So what's South Korea doing to kind of answer that? Well, it appears that there could be things happening below the surface. Now, massively significantly, Japan has officially agreed to cooperate with the USA to support Ukraine with weapons. This is huge, and I think it goes against their previous military strategy in not providing weaponry and not exporting in this kind of way. So first of all, as part of the discussions, the US plans to purchase Japanese weapons, which are produced domestically under an American license. We'll see what happens there. There's talk about, I think John Ridge was talking about, and Colby Badwal were talking about a particular artillery ammunition shell as well. So it could be the Japanese are going to help out there. Now, Bulgaria has confirmed finally the long-awaited armoured personnel carriers heading to Ukraine that are on the way. After months of delay, 100, someone else said 110, but at least 100 armoured personnel carriers are on the way to Ukraine by rail. Bulgaria's Defence Minister Todor Tagarev confirmed on March 14th. I think the transport's being paid for by, is it Romania or Czechia? I think it might be Romania. Because the issue why they hadn't been transported is because they were unsure who was going to pay for the transportation. They were happy to give the stuff, but didn't want to shell out for the transportation. House Speaker Mike Johnson has informed Republican senators that the House plans to send legislation to aid Ukraine, but it will differ significantly from the Senate's $95 billion aid package that was adopted with a bipartisan majority. Now, I talked about that in a breaking news update yesterday, and just to let you know that is a potential. It might happen, might be a good thing. We shall see. I mean, it won't be as good as the original bill, and it might involve lend-lease and loans. But, if it's that rather than nothing, then obviously we'll take that. But something else has also come out since then. Now, I'm trying to work out whether this is the same as what The Hill reported yesterday, or whether this is a separate one that Johnson's now coming up with. I just don't know. And there's a lot of people in my thread saying, I don't trust Johnson one iota. This man is just delaying. These are all delaying tactics. He's not really supportive of Ukraine. And of course, there is that. There's, of course, that potential. But yeah. Here, Speaker Mike Johnson told Politico that he expects to pass a future Ukraine assistance bill with Democratic votes, an acknowledgement of the persistent resistance to any new aid within the GOP. Johnson said in a Thursday interview that at the House Republican retreat, that aid to both Ukraine, so this sounds like the same one actually, to both Ukraine and Israel could come up as one or even two separate bills. So there's more information on this about it being separated from the appropriations and separated potentially from anything else. So it could well be just a separate Ukraine bill. But again, if that is the same, I do apologise for getting a bit confused there. But if that is the same as we reported yesterday, then as some of the critics say, yeah, great, but how long is this going to take? Is this just another way to delay things? So it's really frustrating, but it could also be the only option available for Ukraine aid. But yeah, go and check my breaking news update from last night out. Okay, here's a test of a Ukrainian mine-laying drone equipped with 15 TM62 anti-tank mines. So another UGV being tested and eventually, one presumes, used. And that's a very heavy payload it's got on there in terms of mines, I would have thought. But it's also a much bigger UGV that can negotiate some of those small ruts and whatnot. So interesting that these things appear to be coming online. See how that develops. And then this is something that we already knew happened, but here's even more evidence to suggest that the Russians... prove that the Russians are indeed keeping an awful lot of military equipment inside the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant because they know it's not going to get bombed, and so they can keep just a massive amount of equipment in there. I don't know what I feel about this because I think it's pretty sensible. Like, in all honesty, and the Ukrainians aren't going to hit that just because there's military equipment in it. I mean, I think that's what I would do if I was in charge of an army. Is like, well, what can't be hit? Okay, but then you start getting onto like putting military vehicles in hospitals and stuff like that because they're not going to hit a hospital. They're not going to hit their own hospital or this hospital. So we put military equipment underneath it. But then that really does, you're tempting the enemy to do that and eventually to hit hospitals on account of that it is actually a genuine military target. So I don't know whether that would ever happen with a nuclear power plant though. And so there's part of me that thinks that's a clever thing to do. I don't know what the international legal ramifications are or legal framework is concerning this though. It's probably illegal. But then, rules for war are just quite an interesting philosophical subject anyway. Let me know what you think about that. And always try and think from the other side. Like, well, what would I do if I had if I had troops and units all around a nuclear power plant? Would I do the same thing? Anyway, I'll probably get attacked by a number of people for even positing such an idea. Right, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care. Speak soon.